welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast and our fellowship of Christ, our leadership in the local church, and our parenting of the children entrusted to us. We all seek forward momentum. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. My name's Eric Miller, and today we have with us David Black. David, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're up from Atlanta.
Yes.
So, David, you are the campus pastor at the Town Center Grace Church outside of Atlanta.
Yeah, Northwest.
All right, that's awesome. So, how long have you been there? I just wanted to get to know you a little bit on this episode and let our listeners know who you are.
So I've been there in this iteration, which is probably maybe something else you may want to get into. I don't know. About 5 years.
Okay. 5 years as the campus pastor.
Yes.
Perfect.
So we were there a little bit longer than that. We transitioned into that before meeting Grace Church. And so a couple, maybe 15 months before that.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, David, as I've gotten to know you in the past year or so a little bit better, I actually got to come down and visit your church, and there's crazy cool stories of what God is doing in and through you, your leadership team, and your community. We actually, Momentum Ministry Partners, gave you guys an award for Breakthrough Church of the Year because of how God has been moving and blessing you guys. And so I want to just do a little bit of a different episode today and interview you, get to know you, hear a little bit of your story and what God's doing in and through the church. And we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us. Is that cool?
Sounds great.
All right. So as I wanted to kind of give our listeners a feel for who Momentum is. We exist to partner with local churches, and we really, really want to help develop ministry leaders. We say to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. You're a part of that. Your story is a part of that and a part of how God has worked in and through you in the past. Tell us a little bit about your context of growing up in that area, your even history with the church before it became Grace Church and you became the campus pastor. What did that look like?
Yeah, I actually have a unique and odd responsibility / role in that I pastor the church that I grew up in. And that was never the plan.
Right.
But it's what happened. And, looking back, we definitely see God's hand in that. And when I say we, my wife and I, Lauren, she's also from the Marietta area. That's where our church is located.
And you met her in first grade?
No. My sister actually met her first, and that's probably another podcast.
All right.
Talk about
another
all
episode.
That. Yeah. And so I actually grew up in the South. My parents are from Jersey. I don't know why I talk the way that I do. So I didn't get the Jersey thing. I also don't think I have a Southern accent.
Right.
And so I actually spent time in a Christian school. I'm that classic firstborn who did what I was supposed to do. At the same time, I also knew what rules I could break and which ones I needed to keep. And so I kind of played that to my advantage.
Nice.
And so my story with Jesus would reflect that. It looks like I knew all the right answers. I knew a lot about the Bible. And then later on in life, realized I never really understood what grace was. And I don't mean the church. I mean, God's grace. And so that really changed things for me. But what it did was kind of unlocked a library of information that people have put in my life. And so that has served me well. And so what I found, and I'll stop talking, maybe you can ask me another question to help focus this, but what I found growing up is that wherever I went, I ended up pastoring people, whether that was a secular workplace, amongst peers. And so that was something that God kind of showed me little by little. It was affirmed in other people, but it wasn't actually something I set out to go, hey, I'm going to be a pastor one day. And oh, by the way, I'm going to pastor the church that I grew up in, where I know the background of all the people and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I love that like you grew up in that church.
Yep.
You had this kind of like realization of like, I don't fully understand, or you're like trying to walk with a foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
And what did God do even to call you into full-time ministry? And then what was the journey like to lead you back to being the campus pastor at this church?
Yeah, I think there's a part of my just how I work in that I feel passionately about the local church in the United States, but more from a missionary mindset than a maybe shepherding mindset. I've learned to shepherd people. I've had to learn to do that.
Yeah.
But growing up, I really felt like, man, there's kids like me. I think everybody has that little aspect of going like, who maybe have a more moral compass, but maybe miss the heart of God.
Yeah.
And so that was always kind of a key motivation, meaning I found myself talking to people who were not from the church world or grew up in the church world but currently weren't in it. And so I actually looked at overseas missions for a while. Some of that is because my number one fear is public speaking. And it was on mission trips overseas where somebody was late and I had to get up and talk in front of people, and God slowly developed that in me. I went to a school for communications because I knew a lot of guys who could not communicate the Bible. And I also knew a lot of guys who were trying to do mission work and not able to pay for it on a theology degree, which, again, that's probably another podcast. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so that calling really came about little by little, I think by people in my life that God put just encouraging me and saying, hey, maybe the box that you see pastors operating in doesn't have to be that way. And honestly, it was college ministry that I cut my teeth on. I got out of school, ended up going back to seminary, and in that took part of a college ministry. And it was a college Bible study in Springfield, Ohio, which is a town that I feel about like a stray dog. I love that little scraggly town and what it is. And there's a part of me that, man, would bleed for it. At the same time, God was doing some stuff among young people from multiple different colleges. There's like 5 or 6, 3,000, 4,000 population schools around there. And so we did a college Bible study on Sunday nights. It had about 150 to 200 people. And it started at 8. I couldn't imagine preaching at 8 right now. And
like that's bedtime.
And then we went to Applebee's for half-price appetizers when it was still cool. So that's kind of, I cut my teeth there. And then out of that came into church planning. And so even in, I'd say that's kind of, church planning reflects that missional kind of heart.
I love like hearing stories like yours where you can look back and see like, okay, here's how God is using all of these random things and experiences to put together a holistic working of what he's preparing you in advance for. And so it's so fun to think that like you grew up in that community, you know the Atlanta area, you have ties there, you understand even the church context and history of what it was. You're like people know your parents. They're still engaged and around. And even the interesting dynamic of your story and what you like realize like, okay, I think I know these biblical things, but I'm not actively like implementing them in my life. And now you're getting to help people in that community understand who Jesus is and how they can actually follow him as well. Buddy, I love that. And I actually, when I was at your church in February, I heard people saying similar things of this is why we wanted to come to this church. There was one family in particular, I was talking to one of the high school kids, and he literally said, like, our family chose to come to this church because they help us understand the Bible from a relevant and applicable context. And I think that's what you do really, really well. And so I love that heartbeat. I love that God's worked in and through you in that way.
Yeah, I would say maybe uniquely in the South, there's three areas that we talk about the good news of Jesus having an opportunity. One would be, we would say, refreshingly biblical. So if you can present the Bible in a way that is not dishonest, but is real, but then also offers it as this is a weird word to say, so maybe you'll cut it, but ointment for like the Bible will cut you.
Yeah.
And it will also heal you. And in the South, oftentimes it's used as a weapon that cuts, and very rarely as a weapon that, or a resource that will heal.
Yeah.
And so it's either one or the other, and it's like, man, you got to do both. So that's what we mean by refreshingly biblical. We would say, hey, there's an opportunity to be radically hospitable. And what we mean there is strangers.
Yeah.
And by stranger, it's the Atlanta area.
Yep.
That's hey, we just moved here. We don't know anyone. Whether that was from Kansas or Kenya, because both are there,
Yeah.
right? People who are suffering, people who are skeptics, and then we would say we want to have a relationship without red tape. Because again, in the South, relationships are not as open to real new connections. So that's just anywhere we can lean into those three areas with our values and just things that we do within Grace Church. It's huge.
Well, I love even the context of your campus, where you're located, where your church is at.
Yeah.
You're kind of in this this business, there's a mall near you.
Yes.
There's all these high-end, nice restaurants. You're in this suburb of Atlanta. The town center area is very pretty. It's highly populated with business world community. And yet, you're a mile from Kennesaw State?
Yep.
The college campus, right in your backyard.
Yeah.
How do you leverage that? How do you take those dynamics as a church, as a pastor, where you're trying to reach your community? What does that process look like? Give us kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and so maybe just for some context for people who are listening, that was not the original location.
Yeah,
and so
true.
the church was planted in the late 60s, and it was a cow pasture. There's nothing there, and the community built up around it. And without going into the detail, they ended up having to move, and they moved to a place that they thought would be temporary, which was an abandoned strip mall area. They renovated it, and then they only planned to be there for a little, but they were there permanently. And so, again, that our interest in coming there was they needed some help with revitalization, and some of those challenges were similar to church planting. But also our interest in going there was the things that they talked about as challenges were very, very exciting to me. And they are what you just mentioned. It's like, we're right down the mile from a college. I'm like, okay. Oh, man, we're in a really growing commercial area. Go on, right? We own our building. Now I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was a challenge. It has been a challenge because it is not a traditional church building.
Right.
We have two buildings with a giant parking lot in the middle, a lot of asphalt, not a lot of green space.
Yep.
So we're not doing the VBS in the front lawn kind of thing. No one lives nearby permanently. It's a lot of temporary housing and a lot of rotating of high-end apartment complexes.
Highway driving to get there. And
we're trying to do ministry in two buildings, and that's for the Atlanta area. That's a new thing.
Yeah.
So we fought it for a while, and we really struggled with it because, and I would say it's only probably within the last year or two that we've realized that those constraints put on us are actually helpful for our focus. And so maybe to your question then, we sit at an intersection. And so a lot of our conversation is how can we be with people in the intersection of their lives? So people are driving through. There's 45,000 cars that go by us. We don't have density. We're in Atlantans drive. That's what we do. So how do we steward what God has given us, specifically with young adults?
Yeah.
In fact, I tell this story often. My wife and I, when we were, I say dating. I don't know what she would say. I was kind of being a punk.
Getting to know each
other. We went to a drive-in movie theater, which we found still existed in Atlanta. And she's like, I'm going to bring my younger sister. And I'm like, okay. So her younger sister's in the back. And I'm driving her, her Toyota Camry, her hunter green Toyota Camry. And I was about to turn in, and somebody was coming and hit us.
Oh.
And the driver actually took off and ran away. And it was a whole long story.
Oh, my word.
But the manager of the movie theater and his wife were behind us because they went out for lunch or dinner or whatever it was. And as soon as we got out of the wreck, everyone was fine. But the guy was like, hey, I'm the manager. He immediately got into the intersection and started directing traffic. And then his wife sat on the curb with my wife and waited for the paramedics and the fire department. And those people were not professionals.
Yeah.
You know, they were not the police. They were not the paramedics. They were not the firefighters. But they were people who were willing to step into that intersection with us at a point. And I just think, man, that's a metaphor for kind of where young adults are today.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything, the opportunity that the church has is to step into the intersection with them. And I hear, you know, I'm not a professional. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to speak their language. We were just kind of just joking about that a second ago before this podcast. But I'm like, yeah, no, you have a part to play in that. And so that's kind of our hope. And saying, you know, God's put us here for a reason. And I can go into maybe how we think through that and if you want. But
talk to me even about like what were you guys seeing happen with the college students, those young adults that are in the area? And if you would even tell that story about the college students who are like hanging out in your parking lot, and then some of the next steps of what you guys are trying to implement and how to connect with them.
So we fell into...
I love this story.
I don't know if I'm allowed to share this story, but I will because it's Momentum
And
Ministry
I asked.
podcast.
Yeah,
so it's
cutting edge.
where you go to get all your all the things that they won't talk about on other podcasts. Here you go.
Facts.
Yep. So if any of your listeners would want to Google the Milk Chugging League, they would probably find a Barstool Sports video, which I would not condone everything that goes on in that video.
100%.
Or that, but they could go find it. Some guys came to us who are followers of Jesus, and they said, hey, we started this milk chugging league at Kennesaw University. And I'm like, what?
Say what?
Yeah. And they said, can we chug milk in your parking lot? And I said, like you and 5 other people? He's like, no. They'd gotten kicked off of... They were doing it in just some Home Depot parking lot without telling Home Depot, and you know how that goes. So they actually said, we hear that you're the church that says yes to things that other people won't. And I said, okay, what are you doing? So he told me, and I'm like, look, dude, you have to go and get an LLC because I can't. You get an LLC, you get some liability insurance, and he goes like, liability? He writes it down, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah.
How do you spell that?
Yeah, it's exactly, I'm not joking. Right? And he's like, okay. And that was it, man. I thought that would be it. And they came back to me and said a month later, and they're like, we got an LLC, we got a board, we got Mayfield is sponsoring us. We got a 60-foot cow. Can we put it in your parking lot? We built a stage. I'm like, all right. And I said, hey, just don't tell the people who go here that you're doing this. Because I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first time they had, probably over 500 students come out. At one point at its height, we had like probably 8 to 1,000 students. The mall was like, hey, you can't park here. And the police showed up and they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is a mall and no one else is parking here.
Yes.
Right. So we had 16 cops show up the first day. And I was like, are you guys, I was so worried. And they're like, no, man, we're just here to watch. They're like, if you guys can get these people to do something besides just hang out and party, we're for it. I'm like, all right. And so, man, it went on for a whole semester. And I just remember having one time sitting watching this just utter ridiculousness go on.
Nice. That was...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And think, man, how do we reach this population?
Yep.
Because, man, if they're desperate to come and watch some people chug milk, there's probably other things. And, you know, at one point in time, I got in a dunk tank filled with milk. They started at 10 o'clock at night, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to be able to say, hey, I know this is fun, and I'm glad you guys have some fun, but at some time, life will not be fun. And I want to let you know that there's other people who are willing to be there for you for that. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. That's just we've seen that happen, and we're like, man, what do we do with that?
I love it.
And so, we started building a profile, kind of what that would look like. So,
David, I love that. I love that story. I think I wish that more churches would be open-handed about the things that get dropped in their lap like that. and figuring out, like, I know you well enough to know your heartbeat in that of like, hey, we're going to put safeguards in place and we're going to make sure that we communicate what we need to communicate. But honestly, then like the fact that you still allowed these guys and even like to be there in the midst of it, like you didn't like, no, I'm not showing up. I don't want to have anything to do with this, but I'm going to look the other. Like sometimes we see churches that'll do that. Like, hey, like, but to leverage everything for the gospel and build those relationships, that's a big part of why we were like, man, we want to recognize your church and what you guys are doing. Talk to us then, kind of next steps beyond that, even through COVID. What was God doing? Like through COVID, you guys were like adding services, and not because you were trying to like spread people out and social distance, but like people were wanting to come and be a part of this biblical community. Yeah. Like speak to that a little bit.
So we grew by 65% in COVID, which was crazy.
Yeah.
We also didn't have a lot of room to go anywhere else.
You're in a strip mall. Like,
it is like, I mean, it's revitalization works, right? Yep. So, man, I think if anybody tells you that they did something intentionally in COVID and they knew what they were doing, they're making that up.
For sure.
So what we did see was we had a form of biblical community that we had people already in relationship with others. Mm-hmm. And what, COVID did is it really just, you either went one way or the other. It kind of dumped people's lives into a spot. And so for us, we were just trying to keep up with what God was doing in that way. Just connecting with people who came in, trying to connect them with other followers of Jesus. And what I've found, and I want to be careful because it's not a rule of thumb, but at least in our context, the majority of the people who are walking in said, I have a community, meaning there's a video game I play with some people, or there's a thing I do. What I don't know is how to follow Jesus. And so if we said, hey, we can help you follow Jesus, and how about you take that to your community, or how about you bring your community, or we'll just provide a space for your community to be in the midst of this, then God kind of does his thing. The Bible is great, and especially, again, in the South. If you can get people to read the Bible, they realize real quick, I didn't know it was in here, and I don't do what is in here.
Yeah.
So what do I do about my stuff?
Right.
And who is this God? And then you have to let them have permission to explore that.
Yeah.
So if you start lecturing, it's gone, right? And so that's really what we've been trying to do.
Oh, that's so good, because I love even that thought of like understanding that a lot of the people who are around us, they live in their own community. Community means something different to them. Yeah. They probably have their like weekend event or the thing that they like doing. But even in the work world, you have like the Chick-fil-A corporate headquarters right around the corner from you. You've got the college campus. You've got all these different unique dynamics within your context. And what I'm hearing you say is, how do we share biblical principles that supersede all of that they can then take back into their communities, or include Jesus as a part of that and do it with us? Yeah,
because at least, again, everything, I just say that in the South. You could name this in the South.
There.
If you ask the average person in the South, what do Christians do? They will tell you they attend church, which means the church has to do something, not stop attending church, by the way, but like do something else besides attend church to actually communicate what does it mean to follow Jesus. And so a lot of people attend church, but they don't know, or at least they're not being equipped to follow Jesus the rest of the days of the week. And when we equip people to follow Jesus the rest of the days of the week, that's where people go, what are you doing?
When they say attend church, is that like this is a reputation, this is part of my identity, this is a societal thing? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's
all of the above.
There is probably a sociologist out there who can do this much. A Christian guy, probably somebody who can explain this a little bit more than me. And the South, historically, again, I'm going to nerd out for a little bit. Like, the church was the center of the city, so the courthouse where the judge would sit was probably in the church because it was the largest gathering space as towns were formed.
Gotcha.
Town halls, city government was there. If there was a tornado or if people were attacking, you went to the church. There was a bell on it for a reason.
Yep.
Also school. Guess where that was held?
Yep.
In the church. And so because of that, the South has always been church-centric.
Yep.
The best way I could probably describe it now is that your church, typically people will talk about their church like where they go grocery shopping.
Yep.
So if I said, "Hey, where do you buy your groceries?" I could probably assume some things.
Yeah.
Right. If you said Aldi, I'd probably say, "Man, you're frugal." That's yeah, okay. You're not no frills guy.
Right.
Maybe you like
Yeah.
mac and cheese for 19 cents or something. Whatever it is
Yes.
now, it's probably $10 now.
I like
but
mac
that's,
and cheese of any
that's what
variety.
it was, right? Yeah. If I said, Meijer or some places there's Publix, it's kind of like a high end, or Whole Foods. There you go.
Whole
Everyone's going to
paycheck,
know
yeah.
what that is, right? Right. Or maybe I do produce at Whole Foods, but then I do dry goods at. Okay, you're telling me it's the exact same thing with the church in the South. So I do Bible study at here, but then I attend on Sunday morning here, and there's a profile. It says something about you.
Okay.
It also says something about. Maybe it might say something about how you relate to your parents, quite honestly. Very rarely do I encounter someone who has not had a church experience, good, bad, or otherwise.
Interesting.
Or knows someone who had one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's often what we talk with first.
Gotcha.
So
Very cool. I love it. I grew up in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And like you'd meet somebody probably at the grocery store, and the first question you ask them is, "Where do you go
Yep.
to church?"
Yep.
And that was like a point of reference.
Yep.
It was a framework of associating or connecting with people. So,
Well, and I would say too, that there's a whole swath of people who've been invited to church but not invited to Jesus.
yes. Yep.
Right.
Yep. So digging deeper into that, I then did ministry for 17 years on the East Coast. Totally different from the Midwest,
Like
and
Northeast.
the Bible Belt.
Northeast? No.
Maryland.
Maryland. Yeah, yeah.
Technically in the South, we were like 20 minutes south
Yeah.
of the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah.
But yeah.
A lot of people don't know where that is, so I'm
Yes,
glad you put
for
that
sure.
up. Yeah.
Well, close to Washington, D.C.
Yep.
How's it? Yeah.
Yep.
But it's crazy because like if you were to ask somebody at the grocery store that you just met, where do you go to church? They're like, why do you need to know that? Like the East Coast mindset is totally different, and West Coast mindset would be the similar. So for you to represent like in the South, this is a thing that speaks to knowing your culture, knowing your audience, wanting to help Jesus make sense in that context,
Yep.
and digging deeper into that. It doesn't just, you're not just inviting them to attend or have a reputation in being a part of the community, but being a part of the body of Christ. And how do you know him and follow him? I love that. I love that that's your guys' heartbeat. So, David, one last piece of your story, and I don't know if this is like a couple minute kind of thing, but I know part of your story, you dealt with burnout.
Yeah.
Talk about that just a little bit, and kind of how did you overcome that? What were some of the things that you put in place? I think especially for leaders that are still pastoring through COVID, we're all dealing with burnout. And Jeff and I even just did a podcast kind of towards that end. But I'd love to hear a little bit of your story and kind of how you overcame some of that.
Yeah, so here's my quick tagline. You can do ministry without knowing Greek and Hebrew.
Yeah.
You can do ministry without knowing all the solutions to the challenges that you face, but you cannot do ministry well if you don't know yourself or how to lead yourself. And so a lot of people, most pastors, most ministry leaders learn that the hard way. That was me. So I did ministry for 10 years.
True.
In a very economically depressed area. Church planting is not for the faint of heart. And I didn't realize that I don't know how to rest. And I found that out because I went to the hospital. And they were like, "Hey, physically you're fine. Tell us about your work." And, I'm married, and your wife will tell you the truth.
Yep.
And so she'd been telling me the truth for quite a while. I just wasn't listening to it. And so God had some. So what I had to do was surrender the steering wheel to somebody who cared about me, which was my wife. And so I was like, "Listen, I don't know how to rest. My body won't tell me. I'm kind of built weird like that. So you need to tell me when I need to rest." And I would have told you that was weak. Naps were weak, right? Like, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, this is kind of where God's leading was helpful in it. A friend of mine had already asked me to sign up for something. So cheap, or I forget what we call it. It's just a bad plug. Here you go. Shameless. Shameless is the word I'm looking for. Shameless plug for Harbor Ministries and a group called Rhythm in 20. Some guys watched their dads do this in ministry. I'd already signed up for it. I didn't even know what it was. So I went out and I started a 3-year journey of walking with groups of guys, learning tools on how to know yourself and how to lead yourself well.
Love it.
It's almost like recovery. It was recovery.
I bet. Yeah.
And so they do women's groups, men's groups, and they also do it again for guys who are in their 50s and 60s. It's phenomenal. So that's my quick story about it.
Yeah.
George Whitfield, I don't know if you knew who that was. Yeah. He preached a sermon one day at a local town, and he wasn't feeling good, so he went home, and to where he was staying, the masses found him, and they asked him to come out and preach, and he's like, he was sick, but he did it anyway. He got up and he preached, and then he died that night.
Wow.
And I like to say I am not as good a preacher as George Whitfield, but I am as foolish. That's yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, David. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
just getting to know you, and I really hope, I think our listeners will be encouraged by your story and your unique insight and perspective, even in how you guys are setting up your church, the vision that you're trying to lead with. We gave you guys the Breakthrough Church of the Year for a reason. Your creativity, the uniqueness of how you're leveraging everything for the gospel, from milk chugging to like even just reaching college students, young adults, the corporate world. I know that's a big part of what you're trying to figure out next. So, buddy, I really hope and pray that God continues to use you guys in a powerful way in Atlanta.
Well, I appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Well, friends, that'll do it for today's episode in this conversation with Pastor David Black. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'd be honored if you would subscribe to this podcast. Please give us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. That not only helps us let other people know about this podcast, but also allows you to know of all the upcoming episodes. Follow us at Momentum Ministry Partners on social media. And if you have questions that you'd like us to address or a topic you'd like us to cover, you can submit those to us by DMing us on social media or send us an email at info@buildmomentum.org. Thanks so much for tuning in.